Hello and welcome to our first conversational Soularize gathering here. Soularize is coming up on October 21st, 2nd, and 3rd in Fullerton and virtually right now. Today we have some wonderful guests with us. My name is Spencer Burke. I'm a co-producer along with Shayna Metzner. Shayna, why don't you just say hi?
Hey there, happy to be co-producer with Spencer. Welcome.
And then we've got Barry Taylor and Gregory Michael Hernandez. Barry, why don't you go ahead and start off and introduce Gregory. Gregory, I've enjoyed traveling with you on a number of different art adventures, but let's continue in the conversation.
Well, hey, everybody. As you just heard, we're going to have a conversation about art and the arts and how that factors into this year's Soularize gathering. And I'm here in London and in Pasadena. One of my old Los Angeles stomping grounds is my friend Gregory Michael Hernandez, Mike. For now, it could be Greg, might be Mike, could be just Hernandez, but for today it's Mike. So Mike is an artist. We have a long history. I'm not even sure. I can't even remember now. It's in the midst of time now where we got there, but you might remember clearer than me.
I have a great anecdote about that. I was a undergraduate at Biola in the late 90s, and I was a big U2 fan, and a friend handed me a chapel tape. We had cassette tapes if you missed chapel, and on it was an early 90s visit to Biola from Barry Taylor, who used a U2 song in his chapel tape. In his chapel presentation. And I listened to that tape like 50 times. I actually had it memorized at one point because it was cathartic, it was therapeutic, and it was like a theology that was taking me somewhere else. And so to end the short story, I found Barry Taylor at a film and art conference in about 2000, 2001. And I was like, why do I know this guy's voice? And I was beginning my deconstructive period. So I introduced myself to Barry and started going to his church in the early 2000s. And that's where our friendship started.
Wow, there you go. Did I know that story about you? I don't know if I did or not.
I may have told you once. I still have the chapel tape.
Probably the one and only time I ever spoke at Biola.
I'm gonna digitize it and send it to you. It's good. Early 90s Barry.
I think that was, was I talking about When Love Comes to Town?
When Love Comes to Town. I'm gonna catch that train.
Kind of interesting because in some ways, bringing up that story, I mean, that's kind of in the soup that is Soularize this year, because that was really a story about taking that story as a way of kind of imbuing people with dignity rather than taking away dignity from them because of their failings, right? I mean, I knew I was on, I do remember that it was kind of I did get a little accosted by people after that chapel thing, because, you know, I was already deconstructing, if that's the word we're using. And I think I was cautiously pushing some boundaries, but, you know, also not really giving a shit. So.
And, you know, I had been to church my whole life. There were little nuggets in it. There were things, you were humanizing the gospel and putting it into the earth in a way that was very fresh for me as a young art student. And so, yeah, that tape and then getting to go to your church in the early 2000s was huge on my imagination as an artist.
Well, there you go. That's that story. I will say that Mike's artistic trajectory has been a profound thing to see. And you can probably see behind him some of the stuff that he's done, which a lot of it had to do in the beginning, particularly with photography, but it's moved increasingly towards kind of structural construction, installationist, three-dimensional post-metaphysical meditations on the substance of life, which I think is really fascinating. I mean, the thing that you did a few years ago out in the desert with raising immigration issues and stuff like that. And I remember I was telling somebody the other day about the door, the concrete door that you put in the it was a concrete door. And at the time I was still teaching at Fuller, and they had this prayer garden that nobody really went into because it was kind of an afterthought of a way to get out of the back of the school down to a coffee shop. And there was this like concrete door that you could hurl like a huge weighted ball at to smash this door. And it was a really cathartic thing that I think once people, I knew a lot of people that just went there to vent theological frustration. I think that's really what it became. You know, it was like almost a way of just getting out, which may have been your intention. I don't know what that door.
Yeah, I actually wrote instructions on the back of the door that, you know, there was a steel ball welded to a chain attached to the door so it couldn't be stolen. But I wrote on the back of the door, like, this is I want you to channel your hurt, your pain, your frustration, your anger at the door. Take it out on the door. And at the end of this exhibit, I'll take the door out to the desert, which is what this is documenting. And I will ritually bury the door and this receiver. So I was exploring scapegoat theory and reading Rene Girard, and I displayed this during the Walter Brueggemann conference at Fuller. And so, yeah, those pictures up there are documentation of the door's final day before it was buried. And then I composed this photo montage in the frame of the concrete door itself. So that's the size of the door. It was a standard door covered in concrete.
It was a really profound thing. And it's interesting because I think in some ways, doors in and of themselves are very interesting things because they keep things out, but they're also like thresholds. You know, you go through doors into other worlds and stuff. And I think one of the processes that art has offered over the years, and it's interesting because when you sort of found me, we were really, I mean, we almost did nothing but art for a while, you know, as a community. And that was a big driving force because I as someone who's always believed in and made art myself, I just always thought that it wasn't just that you needed to have a theology of art, you know, some critical theory about how art functions, but we needed to sort of see the role that art could play as a mechanism for sort of theological liberation and stuff like that. And I always thought that your kind of art with its kind of relationship to the lived world, you know, the outside world, was always about this kind of the pushing of horizon and time into sort of new arenas. Yeah, interesting stuff. And Spencer's a photographer as well, which is an interesting thing because photography is a lie that tells the truth in some ways.
I love that. Well, and you know, I never did well personally with, you know, quiet times, all that kind of stuff. But when I grabbed a camera, I connected in wonderful ways. And it kind of the door idea, you know, like art has been kind of that soft door that allows us to enter into some subjects that people can't touch on in other ways. And I know sometimes when I go to have a theological conversation, it's difficult, but as a photographer thinking about kind of a metaphor or a story, it kind of, transcends that line of logic. And even with Soularize, I think, you know, we were able to have even 20 years ago, a film festival. In fact, I think that's how we met, Barry, you know, like, and that was 2021. And there's a number of different, or sorry, yeah, 2001. And there's a number of different ways that people connect with. And even maybe we could play with a little bit the idea of how arts, even with Soularize, no matter who you are, like I'm just an amateur photographer. I love playing around with it and such, but it's a personal expression. And I was able to, in fact, just yesterday, I was on a Ashoka game and I worked together and they asked me to do a quiet time and I did monetations, this, single word, single image as a spiritual practice. And so there are places where this expression happens. And maybe we could talk about how some people are ready to go into the deep theological conversation, but others are just feeling it right now. And I can imagine, I get literally, as you were talking, Michael, about the idea of people slinging a steel ball at a concrete wall or door, to do that expression, even inviting people into the art, even if they don't know it, and the power of that. And so artists, and even people who would be artists, can participate in this way of just expressing whatever it is. And it might be the first step for people to begin to engage. Thoughts?
Yes, it was when I was becoming disenchanted with the form of Christianity that I grew up with. In that time, part of my disenchantment was with preaching. And I felt that preachers very often don't realize that they are artists. They are in the process, their job is to interpret, their job is to embody, to perform. And so early on, I was like, man, maybe in seminary, they should be teaching preachers art classes. Art is where you learn these tools of interpretation. And then for parishioners and people who, bankers or accountants, you don't have to be an artist to realize that your life is an art form. Art is happening in the way you take in information and then put it back out or express yourself. And so with that door project at Fuller Seminary, in talking about that piece, my perspective was that the art is I merely set up a vehicle, and then anyone who comes upon that piece is the artist. You are tearing down what I built, making something new out of it. Some may call it destructive, but then so in the end, the artwork itself on my wall is merely a relic to the event. It's a relic. I think of artwork as a relic of something that happened, and that something that happened is art.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Mike. I mean, I think I read somewhere the other day in an art magazine, this guy, he was actually writing about collage, which I found fascinating because I do a lot of collage work, and he basically he ended his little essay. He said the story of an image is never complete, and I think that's the interesting thing about art, is that you make a piece of art and it remains a relic. It's there, but its story keeps moving. Because now someone engages not with the actual wall, but the image of the wall, and it allows them to sort of go into another thing. And I think the challenge to sort of go back to that kind of disenchantment with preaching is that along the way, I think what happened, because theology used to be taught as a liberal art. Liberal arts colleges is where you used to go to do theology and stuff like that. And somehow it's sort of shifted over in this desire amongst Christians of all kinds to sort of fight back against what was perceived as the overwhelming wave of society that was eradicating the power of the church or the authority of scripture and stuff like that. They resorted to sort of a kind of mechanistic, and it's almost like the tools became more important. You had to get, so you're no longer creating a work of art when you give a sermon, you're telling the truth. Well, I happen to think that the truth gets told in any number of ways, and perhaps most importantly, it gets told symbolically, because, you know, otherwise you're just giving a piece of propaganda to people, you know, and you're telling people. The thing about art is you can make a piece of art and you can write on the back of that piece of art what it's for. But the person standing on the other side of that piece of art, they make their own interpretation. They make their own assessment of what it means, because there's a subjectivity to art that allows people to interact with it and discover something of themselves in it. And I think maybe what the disenchantment you felt was that the human aspect gets lost. And it's understandable, because if you, and you were at a theological school, so you know, in the hermeneutics class, it's all about, you know, how you stand and how you speak. And in many environments, you get a preacher's voice. You know what I mean? You're not supposed to speak. Subjectivity goes, you're supposed to be objective, as if you can be. You know, I mean, we're all looking at the world through our own eyes, you know, through our own subjectivity. And I think this is why art becomes so important, and is such an interesting vehicle for people to sort of work some stuff out. Yes, Spencer.
So now we could do the full circle Biola union here. So I was a student there as well, did photography, but I was also on faculty and taught photography. And the biggest struggle I had with reworking the department was it was under the communications department, because photography was not art. It was propaganda. It was to tell the story. It was to, you know, document in that way. And moving it over to the art department gave a great opportunity for us to not think about religious art as propaganda or religious communication, you know. And so there was a wonderful breakthrough moment, at least for me, and hopefully a little bit of those people who I was engaging with on the committees, to think about, what does this mean? And so maybe we could play a little bit with how arts in religious settings. I mean, I love the idea of even the speaker as, or the preacher as artist. You know, we've always thought about that, but so many times people have to. And again, I'm not trying to be rude or mean or, you know, negative critique, but I know when we did the DeMa Film Festival back at Soularize in Seattle, I struggled constantly with people tacking verses on the end of the film right before the credits. I'm like, well, why did you do that? And it was somehow to legitimatize it, or if that's a word, you know, that I could enter it into a spiritual film festival. It's like, it was beautiful, you know, like, and I'd have to cut the projector before, you know, they did the, you know. And so what's your thoughts on, you know, this idea of, as we start to create arts, especially even as Soularize, people are looking maybe a work they already have and they're trying to manipulate it to be good, you know. And Shayna, you have an idea.
Well, I think that maybe it'd be more interesting to hear what Michael's working on right now, and maybe you know, conceptualize how that applies to your question.
Sure. So right now, I'm in my studio is in a church, and you know, about 10 years ago, I thought I would never go to church again. And what do you know? I actually have my art studio in a church, and I'm very involved with this specific church. So I live in Pasadena, California, and Mission Gathering Church is under the Disciples of Christ. And when they rebooted this church almost 3 years ago, this church is across the street from where I live. And I met the pastor. And long story short, I made a proposal to them, and I said, you know, that you've got this side chapel that is a big, you know, open space. I have 15-foot ceilings here, 1,000 square feet. And I said, you know, I'm a very ambitious artist, and I deal with religion and politics in my work. And for me to have a free studio would be incredible for my practice. And if I could have that space as a studio, I will put on art shows, you know, 6 to 8 exhibitions in the foyer of the church, and we'll call it our church gallery. And so, so we struck that handshake deal, and we've been doing it since. And so and so we call it Irenic Projects, and there's a Instagram page, Instagram for it. The handle is Irenic Projects. That's spelled like ironic, but with an E in the middle. Irenic means peace or conciliatory. And the vision for Irenic Projects is to bring local artists, Los Angeles artists, who may not, I prefer to show work that does not have an explicit religious component to it, but that I know connects to the faith tradition in some way, whether it's overt or subtle. And so I want to show, artists who are just doing their thing and might wonder at first, why would a church be interested in showing my art? I don't make religious work. And at the same time, I want the church community to say, how does this art relate to the faith? And then through the process of the exhibition, I want to bridge that gap in a way that gives a little bit of an aha moment to each camp. And then the art becomes a catalyst for conversation and realizing that what the church community really wants at its core, or is really looking for, is also part of the desire and the things that are already happening in the world around us, and to kind of blur these boundaries between religion and politics, and to realize it's actually a very complicated, interconnected web of desire and social justice and what is control, and what does our future look like? Who are we as humans? These are not, nobody owns those questions or will own the future of those successes. So that's how I got here. And then the congregation gets to see, and we also have artists in residence now. We have 6 or 7 artists on campus. So this church is buzzing with creative activity 7 days a week. It's not just a building for Sunday mornings.
And what about the project that you're doing right now? Because I think that's a kind of an interesting example, both of what you do, but how it fits into this grid that you're talking about, the intersections of, if you like, culture and politics and religion.
Yeah, right now I'm working on a project where I am. It's going to be a sculpture on a mountaintop in the desert, out past Joshua Tree, and it's going to take place on the morning of September 11th. That'll be the 20-year anniversary of the attacks. Clearly, we're having many conversations in our culture right now of how 9/11 changed America, and how we're still living in the wake of what happened during that time. And so I'm combining September 11th with the Abraham and Isaac story in the Bible. And the Jewish and the Islamic and the Christian traditions have always wrestled with that story. I've always wrestled with it. There are ways in which that core story could be seen as a root of religious fanaticism of all stripes. It can give permission for those who feel singularly compelled by God to take extreme measures to do so. And so I want to reinterpret that story in my way and add to the cacophony of voices who have done so. Famously, Soren Kierkegaard wrote Fear and Trembling, and then Derrida, riffed off of that, and Caputo has, riffed off of Derrida. And so there's this philosophical history, there's the religious history of that story. And so my sculpture will be it'll be in a way an altar. I'm going to turn my desk here to show you. these are parts of the sculpture in process right now. It architecturally, it references the ruins at Ground Zero after the attacks. The mountain that I've chosen to install this piece is actually in this photograph right here. It's a very pointy, I chose it because it looks like a volcano. And so this sculpture is going to go up and out of the very top, as if it's a volcano exploding, or as if something, you know, from the core of the earth is being thrust out to the sky. And I'll show you, there's 5 walls to this sculpture. And that's the third. I just completed the 3rd wall right now, which is like a spider web, like the exploded view of the interior of a, you know, bare bones structure, which if you go out to the high desert, there are a lot of these homesteads that are out there. So I'm making a lot of visual references in this piece. And then ultimately on the morning of September 11th, I'm going to deliver a sermon at the site. It's going to be videotaped, where I'm going to present my interpretation of what is happening in this story. And then I will transition from a sermon into a performance where I become Abraham and reenact this. So I'll be making quite a few imaginative, what some people may consider leaps, but I'm also following the text, and the text lends itself to a lot of potential leaps. So that's the gist of the project.
Yeah, there's nothing to talk about there. There's nothing theological there. It's really, you know, it's really the interesting thing about the Old Testament stories is they're actually quite lean on information, considering, you know, what we write a lot of stuff into those things. It reminds me, I consulted on this film a few years ago about Moses. It was like a big Hollywood film that came out with Christian Bale playing Moses. And I was invited in to read the script because they were worried about how they were interpreting, you know, certain things, like when the burning bush, you know, how they were gonna, and they wanted to know if Christians would be offended by that. And I'm like, well, you probably asked the wrong Christian, because I actually don't care and stuff. But we were sitting around this table afterwards, and everybody started talking about stuff. And at one point I said, has anybody actually read this story, like from the Bible? And you could have heard of, there were like, I don't know, 12 people around this table, like script writers and everything. And I think the actual screenwriter had read it, but nobody that was working on the film had actually read it, because they were asking these questions. And I'm like, I said, I didn't say that to guilt you. It would take you 5 minutes to read this entire story. It's like, it's not even, if you were pitching it as a movie, they'd say, I need more. You know what I mean? But we fill it with all this information that we then say is true. And I think, you know, to go back to, you know, Brueggemann, the imagination plays an immense role, not only in the arts, but also in the realm of, well, in life and theology, which is why we're so committed and always have been over the years. As Spencer said a little while ago, I mean, I met Spencer because I went up to Seattle to see what this spiritual film festival was about. And we'd sort of heard of each other and passed like ships in the night. But ever since then, you know, we've done 2 or 3. The 3 of us have been involved, and other people, in doing various gatherings, all of which have had incredibly strong arts-based hearts and cause to them, because we feel really strongly that, well, firstly, I think that art is one of the deepest forms of human self-expression. And it's also one of the most visceral ways that humans can reflect on what it means to be human. And this year, a sort of anniversary version of Soularize, raised from a sort of proverbial snooze in a post-pandemic environment. The theme is humane spirituality, which sort of ties into your whole idea of how inhumane Bible stories can be when they get taken to extremes. And, you know, whether it's a scapegoat analogy or a victim analogy, or violence in the name of God justified because God told you, or whatever else it is. But our search really, and our hope, is to find the humane in the human conversation about faith, religion, spirituality, what belief, whatever you want to call it. I don't even know what to call it anymore, because I don't really sort of subscribe to any of those terms. To me, it's you know, how to be human is key, a thing that we sort of miss. And I think part of the reason I wanted you to help us out, because we're not only talking about your art today, but you're also part of our little team of people that are encouraging other people to join us and bring their art to the table, is because of your interest in the way in which art and theology intersect with real life in the real world, whether it's politically or socially or physically or metaphysically. You know what I mean? Were you going to say something, Shayna, or were you just prompting me to mention something else?
No, I actually just, I wanted to ask Mike, as far as the engagement goes, I mean, that project just sounds amazing to me. I mean, just visually what you're explaining, and it brings me back to the image of the towers and the twisted steel, and then to turn that into a volcano. I mean, just that's striking. But your other piece, I don't know a lot about your art, but your other piece that Barry mentioned was the door and the you know, wrecking ball, and that it depended on other human beings to engage with your piece. So how will you, how you're given a sermon, how dependent are you on other people for this installation? I mean, obviously they're going to help you build it or something, but
I'm very dependent on friends to help me get the sculpture up the mountain. That's been my biggest hurdle to figure out, is, you know, this sculpture is going to be 15 feet tall and very wide. It's made out of lightweight wood. We need to, you know, hike it up this. It's about an hour hike off the road, and it's a very treacherous, rocky mountain. So I need at least 5 people to help me get it up there at the break of dawn. And it needs to be photographed, and it needs to be, you know, the performance needs to be videotaped. So since it's so remote, that's part of the point, is that very few people will have the ability or desire to get out there and witness it. But it will be videotaped for future exhibition. And I have this platform that I'm building the sculpture on right now that that can be used to show it, you know, in a gallery or something later. The sculpture itself is only going to touch the mountain at 5 points. And so, but anyway, you know, I want to project the video feed of the performance through the sculpture in a setting later down the road. And then people will be invited to walk around the sculpture and see the images of the sculpture in the desert on the wall, and sort of have this mediated experience of an event, because that's ultimately what the scriptures are. That's what our entire form of human communication is, you know, that's why we're all artists, because we are all mediating something through another form, even if it's just language. You know, it's like, well, we weren't there for Abraham and Isaac if it actually happened in that way. This is a mediated story that we've inherited, and what are we going to do with it? You can't just read the text and say, well, it's self-explanatory.
Barry, maybe you could touch on this a little bit. That I love what Mike was just saying, is that a lot of people, it's art for art's sake, and that's really true. In fact, I would only do my stuff for me, but it's powerful when other people see it, right? And so there are very few platforms for these kinds of things, especially for spiritual innovators or people thinking about these thoughts. And Soularize has always been kind of on that leading, bleeding, cutting edge where people would say, hey, you're crazy. And we're like, well, okay, maybe I am. But for those artists who are thinking about like, well, you know, sometimes I need a deadline. I mean, let's just talk artists, right? You know, sometimes I need a platform, you know, sometimes I need, how does Soularize maybe afford some of these things in this particular humane spirituality kind of conversation?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the interesting thing about art of all kinds is the best art is art that you make first and foremost for yourself, because it's something that's incredibly personal that you feel you need to do. And I always think that, you know, if you're making art for an audience, that's a whole different conversation. By the same token, all creativity thrives on being experienced and handled by others, you know, I mean, whether you're judged for it or you receive accolades, you know, and how you do that, whether it's professionally or on an amateur level, you know, we all want our art, whether it's writing or photography or you know, installation, sculptures up a mountain, you know, we do it for ourselves because we're interested and we're curious about the world. But the interaction with other people is really important. And so what we are hoping and what we would like to see is people bringing their art to be handled by other people, to be experienced. And you know, I mean, I'm sitting here going, you know, Greg's talking about getting 5 people to carry this up the mountain, you know, and hike. And I thought you were going to say you were going to leave it there. And I'm like, bloody hell, not only do they have to carry it up there, they got to carry it down. And that's always worse, because when you get up there, there's a relief, but now you know what you're into when you're going back. So they have to be 5 really good friends. And I'm like, most of the time, you know, I sit here with a pair of scissors cutting things out of a magazine, and you know, sometimes I get a backache from just leaning over too much, you know. So you could hear, you know, Mike's project and go, oh well, you know, that's not my thing. But it's just one of the many varied aspects of the artistic process that we want to introduce people to, and the way we've got it set up with the apps. You know, there'll be opportunity not only to bring your art, but to talk about your art in your own room, where people can come and you can give a seminar if you want, or you can just set up like your own sort of virtual art gallery and not have anybody do anything but enjoy it, or maybe leave comments and stuff like that. And we're hoping that you know, people will want, and it doesn't matter what art it is, you know, we're not, I mean, you know, there are different levels of when you talk about art, you know, you can apply a lot of theory to art and you can go, well, that's, you know, doesn't work because they got blah, 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 blah. That we're not sitting around with a bunch of critics going, oh, that doesn't, actually, I've got a better analogy. Every year in England, at the Royal Academy of Arts. The Royal Academy of Arts has been around since the 1700s. It has 83 members. They're all like David Hockney, major British artists that are alive. They get voted in. Every summer, they have an event called the Summer Exhibition. And the Summer Exhibition is open to anybody in Britain to submit a work of art. And the 83 artists, I think it is, who are part of the academy, they appoint about 3 different people and they make a team and they curate an exhibition of people's art. And it's one of my, in fact, I already got my ticket. It's the, I got it last year in the pandemic and they didn't have it, but they held it over and did it in the winter. I went to that. It's one of the most amazing things to see, the breadth of creativity, and it's everything: sculpture, architectural models, video, painting, abstract painting, pottery. It's just room after room after room of just amazing human creativity. Some of it is stunning, and what they do is members of the Academy put their art in it as well, but nothing is named. And you can bid on this art, and you don't know when you bid it. I mean, you might know if you know a particular artist, you know, you might go, oh, David Hockney, I think I'll put a bid on that. But nevertheless, because the idea is not to judge people's art, it's just to present a spectrum of people's creativity. And that's what we wanted to do with Soularize, is to give people an opportunity to kind of join us in creating a kind of visual spectrum of how we think about what it means to live out a humane or a human spirituality connected to reality. It's about life in the real world. You can interpret humane spirituality in so many ways, but what you can't do is be inhumane about it. It's really, if you take that quite seriously, what's humane spirituality? Well, you can make an interpretation of that. Mike's would be an example, challenging notions of violence done in the name of God and ratified by scripture, whether it's, you know, whichever religion you might pick, you know, justifying violence against another in the name of God. Maybe that's not so humane. Maybe it is, I don't know. You know, you have to work that out for yourself, and you have to listen to Mike's sermon to work out what he thinks. But really, it's to craft together a picture, an eclectic picture of what we all think about life in the 21st century in this post-pandemic world, or maybe not even post-pandemic, let's just say post-major lockdown world, because half the world is still locked down. The pandemic hasn't gone away. We've all lived through the trauma of that in various ways. There are wild times in politics and division and all of those things. And there seem to be so many hurdles, you know, that most recently, all of the climate change stuff that's going on, and these like dire reports about the planet and all that stuff, all of that factors in. That's all the conversation. It's a big conversation, but I think spirituality is always to be a big tent with lots of different voices. And if you like, we just want a glossalia, a cacophony of voices representing themselves in whatever form: spoken word, poetry, writing, cinema, video, cell phone pictures, collage, painting, sculpture, dressmaking, fashion. It doesn't matter. We're just really interested in people just bringing their vision of humanity expressed through some artistic medium to our gathering, to give it a bit of color and to give it a sense of life.
I love that. Well, and again, if you're wondering how, it's just Soularize, SOULARIZE.live, LIVE. So Soularize.live, you can go. Doesn't cost you anything to submit your idea. Go ahead and click on whether it's arts or workshop, or you want to host a village. But as you click on the arts submission, you put in a little bit of information, and then we'll look at it and just make sure it fits within broadly the humane spirituality theme. And then if you're accepted, just like anyone else, the cost is $19.95 to join the community. And then you'll have a unique opportunity to set up your own gallery page. And then that's be able to be presented. Again, we're not just looking for content. We really are looking for a community to be built. And then your work will be there for anyone to be able to interact with and engage, and you'll have conversation. And some will be picked for our main event on October 21st, 2nd and 3rd in Fullerton, and it'll be live streamed through the app all over the world. And many people will be able to see it and engage and work with that. And we'll find ways to love and support each other with that, as well as potentially some opportunities for scholarships or support or other ways in which we can encourage you with your work. So again, go to Soularize.live. Anything else that anyone would like to say? Yeah, Shayna.
Just, where can people find out more about Mike's project?
You can find my website. I have two working websites right now. Exilechild.com has a pretty extensive archive of most things I've done. And also gmhstudio.com. My Instagram is exile.child. That's EXILE. And for Irenic projects, my curatorial project here at the church, that is Irenic Projects Instagram. And
Cool. We'll put them in the notes.
yeah, and back to what we were saying about showing art, and there's a sense of built-in limitation for artists when it comes to I have the freedom to make my work. I don't need anyone to give me permission to make my work, but when it comes to exhibiting my work or sharing my work, how do I get a gallery? How do I get someone to say yes? And really, it was a while ago that I said, well, I can't be burdened by this. I need to create my own opportunities to exhibit artwork. And more, that's the thing that people are gravitating toward, because then it means art is in the real world. Or here at the church, we recently invited USC undergraduate seniors to exhibit their senior show here at the church because they couldn't do it at USC. The galleries were not allowed to open. And their eyes lit up by the architecture of this sanctuary, and it ended up changing their work. They realized my work doesn't have to live in a white gallery cube. What if it's at the bottom of a stairwell that leads up to a pipe organ? What if it's between stained glass windows? And that's really the experience that I've enjoyed the most of inviting artists to exhibit work in the church, is context changes everything. And our current show is an artist named Sheila Pinkle, and she's an activist and has been exhibiting work since the 1970s. And she said this is her favorite exhibition that she's ever done. And she never considered herself a religious person or associated with any church, but it's the context, and what Soularize can do is to just broaden your imagination. Of you don't need a gallery to say yes to you. You can connect with other artists and do it yourself in new and refreshing ways.
And if I can just add a little something, because you mentioned the word limitations. If anybody's feeling that they don't meet some weird requirement, Nick Cave, one of my favorite performing artists, said that you've got to understand your limitations, because it's your limitations that make you the most wonderful disaster you probably are. So bring your disastrous self to Soularize and use your limitations to get there, is what I say. Anyway, thank you so much. Thanks so much, Mike, for taking the time, and good to see Shayna and Spencer, and we look forward to seeing everybody online and live.
Looking forward to it. Thank you all.
Thanks, you guys.
All right. Thanks. Enjoy.
Bye.